While Buffalo Roam, The Wild Western Days of Colorado, Episode 18. When people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. Thomas Jefferson. July 11th, 1804, dueling grounds, Weehawken, New Jersey, bank of the Hudson River near today's Lincoln Tunnel. When called to him, upon his receiving the fatal wound, I found him half sitting on the ground, supported in the arms of Mr. Pendleton. His countenance of death I shall never forget. He had at that instant just enough to say, "This is a mortal wound, doctor," when he sunk away, and became to all appearance lifeless. I immediately stripped up his clothes and soon, alas, asserted that the direction of the ball must have been through some vital part. His pulses were not to be felt. His respiration was entirely suspended, and upon laying my hand on his heart and perceiving no motion there, I considered him irrecoverably gone. I, however, observed to Mr. Pendleton that the only chance for his reviving was immediately to get him upon the water. We therefore lifted him and carried him out of the wood to the margin of the bank, where the bargeman aided us in conveying him into the boat, which immediately put off. During all this time I could not discover the least symptom of returning life. I now rubbed his face, lips, and temples with spirits of hartshorn, applied it to his neck and breast, and to the wrists and palms of his hands, and endeavored to pour some into his mouth. When he had got, as I should judge, about 50 yards from the shore, some imperfect efforts to breathe were for the first time manifest. In a few minutes he sighed, and became sensible to the impression of the hartshorn, or the fresh air of the water. He breathed, his eyes, hardly opened, wandered without fixing on any objects. To our great joy he at length spoke. "My vision is indistinct," were his first words. His pulse became more perceptible, his respiration more regular, his sight returned. Soon after recovering his sight, he happened to cast his eye upon the case of pistols, and observing the one that he had in his hand lying on the outside, he said, "Take care of that pistol. It is undischarged and still cocked. It may go off and do harm." Pendleton knows, attempting to turn his head towards him, that I did not intend to fire at him. "Yes," said Mr. Pendleton, understanding his wish, "I have already made Dr. Hossick acquainted with your determination as to that." Perceiving that we approached the shore, he said, "Let Mrs. Hamilton be immediately sent for. Let the event be gradually broken to her, but give her hopes." During the night he had some imperfect sleep, but the succeeding morning his symptoms were aggravated, attended, however, with a diminution of pain. His mind retained all its usual strength and composure. The great source of his anxiety seemed to be his sympathy with his half-distracted wife and children. He spoke to her frequently of them. "My beloved wife and children," were always his expressions. But his fortitude triumphed over his situation, dreadful as it was. Once, indeed, at the sight of his children brought to the bedside together, 7 in number, his utterance forsook him. He opened his eyes, gave them one look, and closed them again, till they were taken away. As a proof of his extraordinary composure of mind, let me add that he alone could calm the frantic grief of their mother. "Remember, my Eliza, you are a Christian," were the expressions with which he frequently, with a firm voice, but in a pathetic and impressive manner, addressed her. His words and the tone in which they were uttered will never be effaced from my memory. About 2 o'clock, as the public well knows, he expired. The following account from David Hossick, Alexander Hamilton's physician who attended the illegal duel between Hamilton, whose face still adorns the $10 bill, and his political rival, Aaron Burr, then sitting vice president, both New Yorkers. At the time, Burr was on his way out as vice president under Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson's first term. In fact, through a deficit in the Electoral College, Burr almost became president and was going to accept that honor, The dispute was settled by an election in the House of Representatives. At that time, the House was controlled by the Federalist Party, on the opposite side of the aisle of either Jefferson or Burr. A moderate Federalist named James Baird abstained from voting, allowing Jefferson to win by that one-vote margin. Burr was then inaugurated as vice president, but Jefferson always held him at arm's length. The 12th Amendment prevented such a crisis from happening again. Quote, "I have come to the conclusion that politics are too serious a matter to be left to politicians. Charles de Gaulle." Quote, "A government of laws and not of men," end quote, John Adams. Government. While necessary, it comes with a tough pill: politics and politicians. The implements of government: people. More government, more politicians, people, more sexual deviants, more common thieves, rapists, felons, slaveholders, conspirators, weirdos, pedophiles, and glue sniffers, and folks who just need to feel some power between crying sessions in the arms of their prostitutes. Did I just say that or think that? But they're not all bad, of course, but everyone, just like every one of us, has faults, some more serious than others. Hamilton was a politician protecting the public from another politician he deemed dangerous to the people, to society. That's the kind of dedication we started with. Not sure how many representatives might act in that manner today. And I don't believe that a group of whipped-up traitors wearing capes and makeup would have gotten very far, the Capitol insurrection of 2021, if the lawmakers like Hamilton and Burr were still around. But that's enough politics. Let's actually just go ahead and get right into government, because that's the focus of today's show, specifically in Arapahoe County, Kansas Territory, 1858. Hi, friends. Welcome to the show, and thank you for tuning in. I'm J.B. Reynolds, high in the Rockies, wishing you all peace, happiness, and wellness. Today, a toe dip in the early government of future Colorado. We're not going to stay long. Listeners of previous episodes will recognize some names like William Larimer Jr., Wagner, Smith, Byers. The setting today will be Denver, Auraria. A flashback to 1856, then 1858, then on to our timeline, the spring and summer of 1859. Government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem. Ronald Reagan. Definitions: government. The governing body of a nation, state, or community. Politics. The activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. Quote, "If you can't convince them, confuse them." Harry Truman. The tribal inhabitants of future Colorado or Florida, Mississippi, California, Montana, Nebraska, Alaska, and so on had streamlined governmental systems that endured in appearance and deed for thousands of years. Term limits were based upon results and a pulse. Disputes were handled face to face, and it was not an act of Congress to speak to the leader. If the chief was exposed as a coward or cheat or killed in battle, a new chief was selected from the best of the people, the most capable. Democratically, and the Plains inhabitants spent little time tinkering with and fighting within over localized governmental concerns. On the other hand, out in the western edge of the Kansas Territory in 1858, hopeful frontiersmen left the, quote, states and its governments. Many found the lack thereof to be novel, enjoying freedom without rule or law. Disturbed, in fact, to find that once arrived, government was already there. The boundaries of Arapahoe County, as proposed in May 1854 as part of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, adopted August 25, 1855, signed by acting Governor Dan Woodson, the county named for the tribal inhabitants that predominated the Plains area. County officers were appointed, but having no one to govern in the remote wilderness of western Kansas Territory, the appointees, if they even saw the country, did not remain. As related in Episode 6 and 7, the Emigrant, Lecompton, and Leavenworth parties had in them the newly appointed Arapahoe County officers who made their appearance at the confluence of the South Platte and Cherry Creek in November of 1858. H.P.A. Smith, Judge; William Larimer, Jr., Secretary; Edward Wynkoop, Sheriff, and these were the primary offices. Arapahoe County was enormous. The eastern border, the 103rd meridian, which is the present-day boundary line between the states of Kansas and Colorado. The western border was the summit of the Rocky Mountains, the Continental Divide, which is also the western boundary of the entire Kansas Territory. It extended the full width of the territory from the 37th parallel to the 40th parallel of latitude. That would be the current boundary line between Nebraska and Kansas to the north. You would just extend that line all the way until the center of the Rocky Mountains. The 37th parallel is the southern border of Colorado today. Quote from Hall, History of Colorado, 1889. On 6 December 1858, when there were less than 200 men in this region, an effort was made to create a civil government. A meeting was convened and an election held for delegate to Congress and for a representative in the Kansas legislature. The first was solemnly charged to proceed to Washington forthwith and employ his best endeavors toward securing the organization of a separate territorial institution. To Hiram J. Graham was delegated the higher mission, while A.J. Smith took the lesser distinction. Both failed. End quote. So as early as November 1858, desires to bury the anchor of independence on this foreign shore arose, the efforts defeated. But why the rush? A few words on government from Thomas Paine, founding father, inventor, political philosopher, French revolutionary. Quote, "In order to gain a clear and just idea of the design and end of government, let us suppose a small number of persons settled in some sequestered part of the earth, unconnected with the rest. They will then represent the first peopling of any country, or of the world. In this state of natural liberty, society will be their first thought. 1,000 motives will excite them thereto. The strength of one man is so unequal to his wants, and his mind so unfitted for perpetual solitude, that he is soon obliged to seek assistance and relief of another, who in his turn requires the same. 4 or 5 would be able to raise a tolerable dwelling in the midst of a wilderness, but one man might labor out of the common period of life without accomplishing anything. When he had felled his timber, he could not remove it, nor erect it after it was removed. Hunger, in the meantime, would urge him from his work, and every different want call him a different way. Disease, nay, even misfortune, would be death. For neither might be mortal, yet either would disable him from living, and reduce him to a state in which he might rather be said to perish than to die. Thus, necessity, like a gravitating power, would soon form our newly arrived immigrants into society, the reciprocal blessings of which would supersede and render the obligations of law and government unnecessary while they remained perfectly just to each other. But as nothing but heaven is impregnable to vice, it will unavoidably happen that in proportion as they surmount the first difficulties of emigration, which bound them together in a common cause, they will begin to relax in their duty and attachment to each other. And this remissness will point out the necessity of establishing some form of government to supply the defect of moral virtue. Some convenient tree will afford them a state house, legislative building, under the branches of which the whole colony may assemble to deliberate on public matters. It is more than probable that their first laws will have the title only of regulations, and be enforced by no other penalty than public disesteem. In this first Parliament, every man by natural right will have a seat, but as the colony increases, the public concerns increase likewise, and the distance at which the members may be separated will render it too inconvenient for all of them to meet on every occasion as the first, when their number was small, their habitations near, and the public concerns few and trifling. This will point out the convenience of their consenting to leave the legislative part to be managed by a select number chosen from the whole body, who are supposed to have the same concerns at stake with which those who appointed them, and who will act in the same manner as the whole body would act if they were present. If the colony continues to increase, it will become necessary to augment the number of representatives, and that the interest of every part of the colony may be attended to, it will be found best to divide the whole into convenient parts, each part sending its proper number. And the elected might never form to themselves an interest separate from the electors. Prudence will point out the propriety of having elections often, because as the elected might by the means return and mix again with the general body of the electors in a few months, their fidelity to the public will be secured by the prudent reflection of not making a rod for themselves. And as this frequent interchange will establish a common interest with every part of the community, they will mutually and naturally support each other. And on this, not on the unmeaning name of king, depends the strength of government and the happiness of the governed." End quote. Now, remember, James Denver had appointed a few immigrants on their way to Auraria. There was no Denver City quite yet, as mentioned earlier. But, number one, James Denver was no longer the Kansas Territorial governor by November of 1858. And as winter drew to a close, the emigration to the Pikes Peak region, fueled by speculation and shining newspaper reports, fanned the flames of necessity. The pioneers were dissatisfied with the current appointed officials and expressed their desire to at least be able to choose their own county and town officers. Lawrence Republican, January 13th, 1859, quote, "The squatters universally repudiate these officials and will not recognize them in any manner whatever. Mr. O'Donnell thinks the miners generally acquiesce in the appointment of Mr. Graham as a delegate to the territorial legislature and Mr. Smith as a delegate to Congress." End quote. A letter to the Kansas Journal of Commerce published January 15th, 1859 from G.N. Hill, quote, "Now for a word on political matters. Governor Denver appointed and sent out here a board of county officers to administer justice to us. We thought we were out of the pale of civilization and would be allowed to regulate our domestic affairs to our own liking, but it seems we could not be allowed that privilege. The citizens of South Platte held a meeting and requested the officers to resign and let them elect their own rulers. They took time to consider the matter and have not yet given their decision. If they do not resign, look out for squally times in the valley of the South Platte." End quote. A letter from John Scudder, January 16th, 1859 to the Missouri Republican, quote, "1/3 of the population is composed of broken-down land speculators from Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas, and they are ready for anything that will make trouble. Governor Denver sent out last fall a body of men with commissions sufficient to organize and carry on the business of the country. They have not all done their duty, and the people are not satisfied with their conduct. The people had a meeting in the last of December and passed resolutions expressing their dissatisfaction. An election will be called for on the 4th of March, and already the ball has been rolling to bring in men from Arkansas and Nebraska, making this new country over 250 miles long, and heaven knows how wide. For the territory west of the mountains extends into the eastern line of California." End quote. From Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense, quote, "Some writers have so confounded society with government as to leave little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different, but have different origins. Society is produced by our wants and government by our wickedness. The former promotes our happiness positively by uniting our affections, the latter negatively by restraining our vices. The one encourages social intercourse, the other creates distinctions. The first is a patron, the last a punisher. Society in every state is a blessing, but government even in its best state, is but a necessary evil, in its worst state an intolerable one. For when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. Government, like dress, is the badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built upon the ruins of the bowers of paradise. For were the impulses of conscience clear, uniform, and irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver. But that not being the case, he finds it necessary to surrender up a part of his property to furnish means for the protection of the rest. And this he is induced to do by the same prudence which in every other case advises him, out of two evils, to choose the least. Wherefore, security being the true design and end of government, it unanswerably follows that whatever form thereof appears most likely to ensure it to us, with the least expense and greatest benefit, is preferable to all others." End quote. At the end of March 1859, an illegal election was held for both county offices and some town elections, precincts, for Auraria and Denver. As reported by the Rocky Mountain News, April 23, 1859, county election. The following is the result of the election for county officers for Arapahoe County, Kansas Territory, held March 28, 1859. Officers elect: Probate Judge S.W. Wagner, Sheriff D.D. Cook, Treasurer John Hiffner, Register of Deeds J.S. Lowry, Supervisors Winchester, Rogers, and Wooten, Clerk of Supervisors Levi Ferguson, Prosecuting Attorney Marshall Cook, Auditor W.W. Hoops, Assessor Ross Hutchins, Coroner C.M. Steinberger. Whole number of votes cast 774. Precinct election, Denver City Precinct. Justices of the Peace H. Swigert, B. Hyatt. Constables William Wilson, G. H. Abbey. Whole number of votes cast 144. Auraria Precinct. Justices of the Peace John Graves, F. F. Burn. Constables S. M. Rooker, W. G. Taylor. Whole number of votes cast 231. There are 5 other precincts in the county, but we are unable to procure the names of the officers elected. End quote. Also, Rocky Mountain News, first edition, April 23, 1859, public meetings. At a meeting of the citizens of Auraria and Denver City held at Wooten's Hall in Auraria on the evening of the 11th instant, our motion of L.J. Winchester, Esquire, Dr. L.J. Russell, was called to the chair, and Andrew Sagendorf appointed secretary when the object of the meeting was stated by H. McCoy, Esquire, followed by General Larimer in a few general remarks. Mr. Collier introduced the following resolution: Resolved, that on account of our distance from and difficulty of communication with the proper authorities, we the people, who are the power here, authorize the late county officers-elect to enter at once upon the discharge of their respective duties without waiting for their commissions from the governor, after having received their certificates of election from the commissioners and having given the proper bonds. General Larimer, Honorable William Clancy, Judge Wagner, and others spoke at some length in favor of the resolution, opposed by the Honorable Henry Allen. The resolution was lost. On a motion from E.P. Stout, Esquire, resolved that the different precincts be requested to appoint delegates to meet in convention on the 14th instant to take into consideration the propriety of organizing a new state or territory, which was carried unanimously. It was then agreed to conduct a convention to be held in a few days, April 15th, 1859. Convention, April 15th, as reported in the Rocky Mountain News, 1859. We are obliged to a correspondent for the proceedings of the convention that met at this place for the purpose of taking preliminary steps towards the organization of a new state. The necessity of forming some government that will be a means of procuring safety to the large immigration now flowing into this country, having impressed itself fully upon the minds of the people, a convention was called to meet at Auraria on the 15th of April to take into consideration and decide upon the course to be pursued. On motion, General Larimer was temporarily called to the chair and Mr. Henry McCoy appointed secretary. On motion, a committee was then raised to examine credentials and report a list of delegates. Committee reported as follows: Fountain City, McCoy, McDougal, Rogers, Schaefer, Wagner; El Dorado and El Paso, Hinman, Winchester, Warren, Gilmer, Putnam, Edwards; Arapahoe, Messrs. Fisk and Casteau; Pollock, Cook, Cochran, and Davidson; Auraria, Henry Allen, W.M. Slaughter, L.J. Russell, D.D. Cook, W. McLean, Thomas Pollock; Denver City, H.P.A. Smith, J.T. Lowry, C.H. Blake, J. Merrick, remember our other newspaper editor, William Larimer, Jr., and William Clancy. On motion, a committee of one from each precinct was appointed to select permanent officers for the convention, and the following officers were selected and unanimously elected: President, Honorable S.W. Wagner; Vice President, Messrs. Larimer, McDougal, Cook, Gilmer, and Pollock; Secretaries, Merrick, Schaefer, Warren, Blake, Hinman, and Fisk. The rules of Jefferson's manual were adopted for the government of the meeting. The convention was then addressed at length, and a full discussion of the important points before them had by Messrs. Allen, Larimer, McCoy, and Smith, and on motion of Mr. Smith, the following resolution was unanimously adopted. Resolved, that the discussions of this convention shall have but one object, viz., the formation of a new and independent state of the Union. A committee of two from each precinct was then raised to report the order of business and resolutions for the consideration of the convention, of which Henry Allen was chairman, and the convention adjourned to meet at 7 o'clock p.m. 7 o'clock p.m. The convention met, and the following resolutions reported by the committee were read, and after some few amendments passed unanimously. The delegates from the precincts of Denver City, Auraria, Arapahoe, Fountain City, El Dorado, and El Paso of the County of Arapahoe, Kansas Territory, in convention assembled in the town of Auraria the 15th day of April, 1859, do adopt the following preamble and resolutions viz. And this is basically their declaration. Whereas a very large number of citizens of the United States having in a very short time being brought together at this remote point of the Union, induced by the recent discovery of rich gold mines in this locality, and the good prospects of success held out here to the farmer, mechanic, trader, and professional man, and being vividly impressed by our recent journey hither over the plains, with the great distance, our heterogeneous and active population is removed from any seat of government, either territorial or state, of the United States, where our wants could be made known, our civil and religious rights protected, and our wrongs redressed. Having already experienced the evils of such remoteness from government adequate to the duty of trying and punishing crime, and being fully impressed with the belief from early and recent precedents of the power and benefits of duty of self-government, and the evils attending the government of bodies of men by agents of states or territories at a distance, or of legislation without representation, and whereas we, men of various vocations in life, having found this country which we have sought, not only abounding in gold, just as represented by a majority of those who have written on the subject of these western gold fields, and all of those who were in the habit of weighing well what they wrote, and having also found it a country rich likewise in timber, in rock, and in crystal water, a country with soil capable of producing food for its inhabitants, if not equal to the richest western agricultural states, at least superior to those of New England, and abounding with inducements sufficient to retain its present population, and a large number of the immense rolling wave of immigrants now on the way from the East, and soon to leave their own crowded homes to partake of the homes and harvest which we are now providing, and whereas, owing to the absolute and pressing necessity for an immediate and adequate government for the large population now here and soon to be among us, actively engaged in the various acts of life and aware of the impossibility of an early formation into a territorial government, that duty having been neglected by the recent session of Congress, and also believing that a territorial government is not such as our large and varied population demands, therefore resolved that the state contemplated shall embrace the following territory, these: its northern boundary commencing at the 102nd meridian of west longitude from Greenwich, England, with the 43rd parallel of north latitude and running west on the said parallel to the intersection with the 110th meridian of west longitude, thence south to the 37th parallel of north latitude, thence east on that parallel to the 102nd meridian, and thence north to the beginning, and that name thereof shall be the state of Jefferson. Note: the state of Jefferson was huge. Imagine all of today's Colorado, then extend the western boundary to include about half of Wyoming, also down into Utah. Moab would have been part of it. Almost a quarter of Utah down into Arizona. The southern boundary about the same as today. The northern line from near Mount Rushmore, Rapid City in South Dakota, west to Jackson, Wyoming, thereabout. Giant. End of note. Continuing. Resolved that citizens of the proposed state be requested to elect delegates to attend a constitutional convention to be held in Denver City on the first Monday in June 1859, and said election of delegates shall be held on the second Monday of May next, or between that time and the time specified for the meeting of the convention. Resolved that it shall be the duty of said convention, when convened, to prepare a constitution for the said state, to call an election for state officers and members of the Senate and legislature and representatives to Congress, and to specify the time and place of holding said election, and appoint election officers of each precinct. Resolved that said constitution shall be submitted to the people for ratification or rejection at said election, and if rejected, the said election shall be considered null and void. Said election shall be conducted as all elections of similar character. Said convention shall consist of delegates as follows: 1 delegate from every precinct, and 1 additional delegate for each 250 inhabitants of each precinct, and each delegation shall be bound to present to the convention satisfactory proof of the number of voters in its precinct. The precincts are as follows: Fort Laramie, Kelowna, Cashlaputer, Arapahoe City, Boulder City, Lupton's Fort, Cheyenne Pass, South Park, Jefferson, Sanders' Ranch, Auraria, Denver City, Douglas City, El Dorado, Fountain City, Fort Garland, Montana, Brownsville, Hufano, Russellville, El Paso, Canyon City, Junction City, and that the Central Committee shall have power to organize any precincts that may come under their knowledge. Also, to see that the different precincts are furnished with a copy of the above resolutions and request their cooperation, and to do whatever they may think is best to carry out the object of their meeting. On motion, the following gentlemen were to appoint a committee to prepare an address to the citizens of the intended state of Jefferson. These: H.P.A. Smith, L.J. Russell, L.J. Winchester, H. McCoy, and D.B. Casto. On motion, the following gentlemen were appointed as Central Committee, viz. W.M. Clancy, C. Davidson, C. Gilmer, J.M. Schaefer, and W.M. Slaughter. On motion, the proceedings were ordered to be published in the papers of the whole United States friendly to our objects. Of thanks was passed to the officers of the convention and for the use of the hall, and the convention adjourned. The kindest feeling prevailed and the proceedings were conducted with the utmost unanimity. And we fully believe that the ball now started will continue to roll on until the most brilliant state in the Union will be fully inaugurated and its success ensured. A couple months later, printed in the June 11th edition of the Rocky Mountain News, the State of Jefferson. On Monday last, the 6th instant, the Constitutional Convention convened for the purpose of drafting a constitution to be submitted to the electors of the district out of which it is proposed to frame the future state of Jefferson, to take the initiative steps looking into its early organization. The returns from 13 election precincts were received, sending 50 delegates. 32 of them were present at the assembling of the convention. After effecting a permanent organization and appointing committees upon the several important articles of the Constitution, with instructions to report upon its reassembling, the convention adjourned to meet on the first Monday in August. Lastly, the proceedings of the State Constitutional Convention. Pursuant to previous arrangement, the delegates elect to the Constitutional Convention for the state of Jefferson. They met at Denver City on Monday, June 6th, 1859 at 2:00 p.m. Judge S.W. Wagner called the meeting to order and moved that W.N. Byers be called to the chair temporarily, which was carried on motion of General William Larimer. Thomas Gibson was elected clerk pro tem. In a short address, the chairman stated the business of the convention, and on motion of W.D. McLean, Committee on Credentials was appointed, consisting of McLean of Auraria, Larimer of Denver, Dudley of Highland, McCoy of Fountain City, Rogers of Herfano, Wyatt of Russellville, Williams of Lupton, Preston of Douglas, Raridan of Sanders, Smith of Baden. On motion of Mr. Raridan, the convention took recess for 15 minutes, at which time the Committee on Credentials were requested to be ready to report. Mr. McLean, chairman of the Committee on Credentials, presented the following report. The Committee on Credentials beg leave to report that they have examined the credentials of the parties from the following districts and report the following named persons as legally elected delegates. Auraria, Slaughter, Allen, Wooten, Byers, Pollock, Russell, Cook, McLean, Sagendorf. Auraria, Slaughter, Allen, Wooten, Byers, Pollock, Russell, Cook, McLean, Sagendorf. Fountain City, McCoy, Davis, Patterson, Eads, Calvin, Barino, Fields, Ensley. Douglas City, W.G. Prescott, J. Provost. Lupton's Fort, A.J. Williams. Denver City, General William Larimer Jr., S.W. Wagner, W. Clancy, S.W. Beale, W.P. McClure, E.P. Stout, H.P.A. Smith, J.M. Fox, R.E. Whitsitt. Remember that name. Gregory Diggins, D.J. Casto, Dr. Davenport, J.S. Turner, S. Reed, Warren, Sopreece, Foster, McFading, F.A. Edwards, and John H. Gregory. Herfano, Hickory Rogers, Levi Ferguson, Sanders Ranch, J.J. Raridan. El Dorado, L.J. Winchester, Russellville, N.G. Wyatt, Baden, A.C. Smith. Highland, J.H. Dudley, Kelowna, J. McDonald, C. Raymond. On motion of W.M. Slaughter, the report was received and committee discharged. On motion of W.M. Slaughter, a committee of 5 were appointed as permanent officers, consisting of the following: W.M. Slaughter, H. Rogers, S. Reed, S.W. Wagner. W.G. Preston, Mr. Slaughter, chairman of the committee, reported the following: that we, the Committee on Permanent Organization, beg to leave to report to the convention the following names as permanent officers of this convention, to wit: President, W.M. Byers; Vice Presidents, Henry Allen, E.P. Stout, R. Sopreece, Levi Ferguson, C.B. Patterson; Chief Clerk, Thomas Gibson; Assistant Clerk, J.J. Shanley; Sergeant at Arms, J.P. Farrer. On motion of Mr. Slaughter, the report was received and committee discharged. Mr. McCoy moved that the convention proceed to the election of president by ballot. Carried. The ballots were cast as follows: S.W. Wagner, 16 votes; William Newton Byers, 14 votes, and Henry Allen, 1 vote. Mr. Allen moved that S.W. Wagner be declared unanimously elected president of this convention by acclamation. Mr. Larimer moved that the following be declared the duly elected permanent officers of the convention by acclamation. Carried. Henry Allen, E.P. Stout, R. Surprise, Ferguson, Patterson, vice presidents. Thomas Gibson, chief clerk. J.J. Shanty, assistant clerk. J.P. Farrer, sergeant-at-arms. Mr. Larimer moved that Reverend Mr. Fisher be requested to open the convention by prayer. Carried. Tuesday, June 7th, 8 o'clock a.m., the delegates being present, the president took the chair and called the convention to order. Mr. Williams moved that the convention adjourn, sine die. That lost. And that means he just said, let's just stop this thing and we don't know when we're coming back. Mr. Allen moved that the words, quote, adjourn sine die, be stricken out and, quote, receive the president's report on committees inserted. This was carried. A little joking in there. If anybody's still here, there's a little joking going on there. The president presented the following report on committees. On boundaries and Bill of Rights, W.N. Byers, E.P. Stout, D.J. Casto. On suffrage and distribution of power, William Larimer, Jr., William M. Slaughter, W.J. Foster. On legislative and executive departments, Henry McCoy, A.J. Williams, William Clancy. On judiciary, N.J. Wyatt, W.P. McClure, and Henry Allen. On militia, state debts, and corporations, J.H. Turner, Hickory Rogers, R.E. Whitsitt. On education and school funds, S.W. Beale, J.J. Russell, J.J. Raridan. On amendments and miscellaneous matters, J.M. Fox, J.M. Schaefer, Thomas Warren. On schedule, L.J. Winchester, H.P.A. Smith, and D.D. Cook. Mr. Cook moved that when this convention adjourns, it adjourns to the first Monday in September. Mr. McCoy moved, as an amendment, the first Monday of August. Carried. End quote. General Hall, from the History of Colorado, 1889. Quote, note the dashing boldness of these resolute pioneers. Here was a convention representing less than 2,000 people, less than half of them fixed residents, before any great mines have been opened or even discovered, before the capabilities of the soil were known, before an acre of land had been planted. At last every soul was in doubt, whether or not ever would be a basis for support of even a small population taking measures without precedent, without authority of law, and without the slightest prospect of ratification for the creation of an independent commonwealth. End quote. Notes. Wow. All of that, and at this point in our saga, all the pioneers really ended up with were some county officials that might or might not perform their duties without authorization from the then acting governor, Hugh Slate Walsh, 600 miles east in Compton, Kansas Territory. But the ball of civilization was rolling. May of 1858, this place is a desert. The plains are unmolested. May of 1859, they're contemplating a separate state. We will return to government and politics in a couple of episodes because the delegates won't meet again until August of 1859, and we have a couple of interesting things that happened before August of 1859. We're going to return to the mountains, back to the Gregory diggings. There will be a different sentiment regarding government at or near the Continental Divide, the peaks, the gold fields. On the 12th Amendment, that required electors to cast separate, distinct ballots for president and vice president. It ensured that a single party could control both the presidency and vice presidency, unifying the executive branch. The 12th Amendment fundamentally adapted the Constitution to the reality of a two-party system. A word on Alexander Hamilton. If Aaron Burr would have won that election, taking office in 1801, and it could have gone that way, and Thomas Jefferson then being the vice president, I wonder what course the country would have taken. Our Western story hinging on the territory purchased by the U.S. under orders from Thomas Jefferson from Napoleon Bonaparte of France. Headline: Hamilton saves the West by act of personal sacrifice. All right, that's a stretch. Or is it? Woo! Arapahoe County elects its own officers without authority. And in a year, our wilderness has some law. Even though the land is still tribal territory, granted by the Treaty of 1851 to the Cheyenne and Arapahoe. Halfway through 1859 and statehood is being sought. A constitution drawn up, delegates and presidents and elections and politicians. Pretty fast-moving these little settlements are, 200 miles from Fort Laramie and 600 miles from the seat of its actual recognized authority. And that, my friends, is today's show. I thank you so much for tuning in and hope that you come back in a couple Sundays. We're going to get back to the mountains, gold, fortunes, and another quick shot of regulation, but this time by the miners. A different situation than the villages down the hill. Best wishes. Be safe. Like, subscribe, or send me an email from the website. And thanks again. This is J.B. Reynolds. We'll see you soon while Buffalo roamed. Copyright 2025.